In March 1989, a 33-year-old British computer scientist named Tim Berners-Lee submitted a document to his supervisors at CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research, in Geneva. The document was 12 pages long. Its title was Information Management, a Proposal. His supervisor, Mike Sendall, read it and wrote 4 words in the margin: vague but exciting. Sendall approved a small budget for Berners-Lee to continue developing the idea. 2 years later, in 1991, Berners-Lee had built the World Wide Web, a system of hyperlinked documents accessible through the internet, navigable through a software program called a browser, built on a communication protocol called HTTP, and a document markup language called HTML. In 1993, CERN announced that the World Wide Web technology would be placed in the public domain, available to anyone, forever, without royalties or licensing fees. The decision not to patent it was deliberate. Tim Berners-Lee understood what he was doing. He has estimated the economic activity enabled by the technology he gave away at approximately $30 trillion per year. This is the Tim Berners-Lee web invention story. It is not primarily a story about technology. It is a story about a decision, a specific, reasoned, deliberate decision, and about what that decision was worth, and what it cost, and what Berners-Lee himself thinks about the web that grew from it. CERN in 1989 was the world's largest particle physics laboratory, employing approximately 10,000 scientists and engineers from over 100 countries. Its research required extraordinary coordination. Physicists from different institutions using different computers, different operating systems, and different file formats needed to share experimental data, simulation results, and documentation continuously. The problem Berners-Lee was trying to solve was specific and practical: how to create a system for managing information across the diverse, constantly changing computing environment of a large multinational research institution. The existing solutions, centralized databases, proprietary networking protocols, shared file systems, all required agreement on standards that CERN's diverse user base could not sustain. Berners-Lee's insight was that the solution should be decentralized. Instead of requiring all information to live in one place or conform to one format, a linking system, hypertext, would allow information to live anywhere and connect to anything. The structure of the information network would emerge from the documents themselves rather than from a central authority managing where things lived. The concept of hypertext, linked documents, had existed since at least 1965, when Ted Nelson coined the term. Vannevar Bush had described a conceptually similar system called the MEMEX in 1945. What Berners-Lee contributed was not the concept, but the implementation, a specific, practical system, HTTP for communication, HTML for document formatting, and URLs for addressing, that could be implemented on the existing internet infrastructure without requiring any central coordination. This was the engineering elegance of the web. It did not require anyone's permission to use it. If you had a computer connected to the internet, you could run a web server and publish a web page. The barrier to participation was effectively zero. This was a design decision, not a technical constraint. The first web server in history was Tim Berners-Lee's Next workstation at CERN, running continuously on a table in the building he worked in. It had a note attached that read, "This machine is a server. Do not power it down." The first web page, also created by Berners-Lee, described what the World Wide Web was and how to use it. It is still accessible at its original URL, info.cern.ch. In August 1991, Berners-Lee posted a description of the web project to several internet news groups and invited developers around the world to try it. Within months, web servers had appeared at institutions in the United States, Europe, and Australia. The growth was not driven by marketing or commercial investment. It was driven by the technical elegance of a system that solved a real problem for anyone who tried it. In April 1993, CERN made the formal decision to release the web technology, HTTP, HTML, and the software libraries Berners-Lee had written, into the public domain, royalty-free, with no conditions attached. The decision was not automatic. There was discussion within CERN about whether to license the technology. The outcome, full public domain release, was championed by Berners-Lee and supported by CERN leadership. What the public domain release meant in practice was that no company could patent the core protocols and demand royalties from web users or web publishers. Anyone could build a browser. Anyone could build a server. Anyone could publish a web page. The absence of a central licensing authority was not an oversight. It was the policy. Berners-Lee's reasoning, as he has described it in multiple interviews, was that a proprietary web would not have become the universal platform. A web owned by one company would have been a competitor to other networks, online services like AOL, CompuServe, and Prodigy, which were offering proprietary internet-like services in the early 1990s. The value of the web was its universality, the fact that any document anywhere could link to any other document anywhere, without permission from any authority. Proprietary ownership would have destroyed that property. The OGAS and Nokia stories in this series are stories of missed signals, warnings that existed and were not acted upon. The Berners-Lee story is different in structure. It is a story about a decision that was made correctly, given what was known at the time, and that produced consequences that the decision-maker did not intend and does not endorse. By 2009, Tim Berners-Lee had become publicly concerned about the direction of the web. In an article in Scientific American that year, he and two colleagues wrote about the threat of walled gardens, platforms that accumulated user data and content without making it accessible across the open web. In 2018, on the web's 29th birthday, he published an open letter to the Internet describing 3 sources of dysfunction he believed were threatening the open web's original design: deliberate malicious use, perverse incentives creating advertising-funded platforms with no incentive to serve user well-being, and the concentration of power, both commercial and governmental, in the hands of those controlling the platforms on which the web runs. He was describing, specifically, the structural consequences of a decision he had made correctly in 1993, that a system with no central authority and no gatekeeping would allow anyone to build anything. The web had been built with that design. Both the Wikipedia and the disinformation campaign, both the independent bookshop and the monopoly marketplace, both the privacy tool and the surveillance system. Berners-Lee's response was not passive. In 2009, he founded the World Wide Web Foundation to advance the open web as a public good. In 2016, he began the Solid Project, an attempt to redesign the data layer of the web to give individual users ownership and control of their own data, rather than surrendering it to platforms. In 2019, he convened the Contract for the Web, a global agreement signed by governments, companies, and individuals, committing to specific principles for what an open web should guarantee. All of these initiatives exist alongside a web that continues to consolidate around a small number of large platforms. Whether they will change the trajectory of the web as it has developed is, as of the current public record, genuinely open. The breaking point in the web's history, the moment when the open, decentralized design began to consolidate into something different, arrived gradually and without a specific event that can be pointed to. Between approximately 2005 and 2015, the economics of the web shifted. The open web, individual websites, blogs, forums, independent publishers, was not replaced, but the proportion of user time spent on it declined relative to the proportion spent within large, closed platforms: Facebook, then Instagram, then YouTube, then TikTok. These platforms were accessible through the web and used web technologies, but they operated with centralized data architectures. The content you created on them was stored in their databases, under their control, and made accessible to you through their interfaces. This was not what Berners-Lee had designed. His architecture assumed that data would live on servers controlled by individuals and institutions, linked together through open protocols. What emerged instead was a web where most user-generated content lived in data centers owned by approximately 5 companies, optimized by algorithms those companies controlled, surfaced according to incentives those companies set. In a 2019 interview with Vanity Fair, Berners-Lee was asked whether he felt responsible for what the web had become. His answer was characteristically precise. He said that the web was a mirror. It reflected humanity back at itself, including the parts of humanity that were not admirable. He had built a system with no gatekeeping, because gatekeeping would have destroyed the universality that made the web valuable. The consequence was that everything could be published, including everything that should probably not be. He did not express regret about the 1993 decision. He expressed concern about the present. The two things are different. The web that Tim Berners-Lee gave away in 1993 has become the most significant communications and commerce infrastructure in history. As of 2024, approximately 5.4 billion people use the internet, roughly 67% of the global population. E-commerce represents over 25% of retail trade in developed economies. The industries built on web infrastructure, cloud computing, digital advertising, streaming media, software as a service, generate trillions of dollars in annual economic activity. The $30 trillion figure that Berners-Lee has cited is almost certainly an underestimate if taken to include the full range of economic activity that depends on web infrastructure. It does not capture the value of medical information accessed online, the coordination of supply chains through web-connected systems, the enabling of remote work, or the long tail of productivity gains from information access that is genuinely difficult to measure. And it was given away, for free, by one person in a 12-page memo to a supervisor who wrote vague but exciting in the margin. The standard version of the Tim Berners-Lee story is a story of gift and consequence, the most consequential act of technological generosity in history, followed by a web that became something its inventor did not fully intend. But the more precise version is a story about a specific decision made under uncertainty. In 1993, Berners-Lee chose not to patent the web's core protocols. He did not know what the web would become. He knew that a proprietary web would not become universal. He chose universality over control. Everything that followed, the good and the bad, is a consequence of that single architectural decision. The web is now the substrate on which most human communication runs. Its concentration in a small number of platforms is a problem Berners-Lee is actively working on. Whether the Solid project or any other decentralization initiative will change the trajectory is a genuinely open empirical question. The inventor of the web is betting that the answer is yes, and spending the second half of his career trying to prove it. The question the Berners-Lee story leaves open is not about regret. He is precise on that point. It is about what follows, whether the architecture of the web can be modified to reverse the centralization that has accumulated over 30 years, whether the decentralization that the original design intended can be recovered after the economics of the platform economy have run for 3 decades, whether an inventor's intention has any bearing on what an invention becomes once it is given away to the world. Berners-Lee's answer, implicit in 30 years of advocacy, is that it does, that what was built can be rebuilt differently, that the web is not a fait accompli, that the vague but exciting idea in the margin of a CERN memo is still being written. The comments are open. The original 1989 CERN proposal is available at cern.ch. The first web page is still accessible at info.cern.ch. The contract for the web is at contractfortheweb.org. All sources are listed in the description below.